those are the very places that make a marker in our brain where we say, even though I'm not perfect, even though I told you the truth about me, even though I did something terrible or something I feel ashamed about or something awful, you are willing to be close to me and make an allowance for me and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, we're on the same team and I'm voting for you. I'm with you, right? Unconditional positive regard, no matter what's going on. And that's the place where we create this feeling of, I wouldn't leave these people ever. Good afternoon, everyone. You've joined us for another episode of Cap and Gown. I'm Rachel Phillips-Buck, VP for Student Success for First Resources, joined today by Matt. Hey.
Hi, good afternoon.
Good afternoon. It's funny because we have been talking all day, but then I have to greet you like I haven't just been chatting with you. Yeah, you are on the other side of the office, so that's interesting.
Hi to everyone joining us. It's good to see you.
Also, Matt, we've heard from so many people about that they're getting our podcast from wherever they're getting it from, wherever you're used to listening to podcasts. And so I know that we don't get to see your faces, but we're really grateful that you join us as we're having our conversations about higher education and all the things that are happening. And I would just like to give a quick thank goodness. April is almost over, which means that the spring semester is almost over, which means that your thick of advising is almost over, right? So I know you're working, I hope you're working, you're not enrolled and you're pursuing them and all of that kind of stuff. But advising to me, like after the period where, you know, you're just like seeing students every 30 minutes, it was always a symbol of like, okay, we're on the home stretch now.
Deep breath. We got it.
So I'm very excited. And also, Matt, we've been talking about, so we are going to take off the months of June and July for Cap and Gown because everybody's on vacation and there's a lot of stuff going on. But also, we're just thinking forward to our summer. And we have a lot of campus visits. We're going to be at ACSD. We have some other conferences that we're going to. I am just ready to go see things.
Yeah, I think summer is going to be great. It's great that things are starting to open back up and we're going to be able to see our friends. It's all meaningful.
And actually, we had a really weird experience, which is we were just in Denver with our team. And on the way to Denver, we had to wear our masks in the airplane. And 2 days later, on the way back, they had done away with that mandate. So that was pretty interesting.
Yeah, I think it'll be a marker in my brain, just that milestone. So
yeah, pretty amazing.
Let me say this. So I'm going through the TSA line. They pulled my bag because I had a bag of chips. I don't know what they thought it was.
Oh.
And but the TSA agent, she wasn't wearing a mask and she was smiling the whole time. And so yeah, because when for TSA agent, I'm thinking, uh-oh, I'm in trouble. But she's smiling. And when she finds the bag, she's like, sorry. And I said, it's fine. It's just great to see your smiling face. And she said, it's so nice to see everyone's smiling face and for them to know I'm smiling. So
yeah, it's really interesting because that's when I was in the airport, the way I realized no one was wearing a mask is a woman smiled at me. And I was like, she's smiling. Oh, yeah, no one's wearing a mask. Anyway, okay. So shall we do the State of the Union? We are going to talk today about.
No, what is the State of the Union?
Well, I'm going to tell you, I'm going to give a preview of our topic today, which is the vulnerability loop coming out of culture code, which I'm kind of obsessed with. So last week with our team, as we're thinking through different interventions and workflows and all of that stuff, I was like, I need to take just 3 days and build the elements in this book into like just really practical workflows for students because it's so helpful.
It is so helpful.
I don't know if you saw in the book that they have like at the end of every of their principles that they're teaching a chapter that's called Take Action. And then it's like, here's 18 things you can do to try.
I think this was totally written for you.
I love it so much. It's awesome.
Yeah, it's so good. Well,
that's where we're going to spend most of our time.
Today's topic it's so relevant. And I mean, I've processed it all day, just thinking about how to start a conversation with someone, how to see someone. So I'm looking forward to it. All right. What's the State of the Union?
Okay, State of the Union. So we have some fun things and some interesting things that I want to share with you. First of all, I'm super excited because NACAC, that you'll remember, is the Admissions Association. They are starting a research project. They got $1.5 million from the Gates Foundation. They're working with Equity Research Cooperative, which is a consultant, and they're doing research on what has happened to retention and enrollment since we went test optional. Yeah. So it's going to be so helpful to understand this. We have 1,800 colleges not mandating entrance exams for fall 2022. So
which on its own is crazy. That's amazing.
Yeah. Some of that preliminary data is coming in. So this is, they're doing this study with 154-year colleges, and it's kind of like half and half. Like some of them have test policy optional and some of them don't. Early data, for example, the University of Missouri found that first-year students admitted without tests had similar retention rates and only slightly lower GPAs than those admitted with SAT or ACT scores. Another study says that of 99 private test optional institutions studied, it was found that the test optional policy is associated with a modest boost in the diversity of student bodies, which, you and I have talked about like 5 different articles that are reporting different things. So I'm just really happy to have this cohesive understanding, like comprehensive all the way across the board, of how it's changing diversity for our student population, and then also how it's impacting student success and retention. So that's
going to be fascinating on its impact. The research on that, from that angle of retention through to graduation. So increasing accessibility, that's going to be really interesting. I'm excited to see that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to that too. Okay, this one's just crazy town, you guys. This President Scott Gordon was the president of Stephen F. Austin State University. On Sunday, there was a tweet that said he and the school have mutually agreed to part ways. The reason is because he basically gave himself an $85,000 raise plus $25,000 bonuses for the next 2 years, while he was telling everybody that they had budget shortfalls and calling for voluntary retirements, academic cuts, and staff furloughs, and nobody on campus got a salary increase because of budget. I just don't understand what he was thinking.
There's a couple of kinds of leaders, right? So there are those who pay themselves and give you a cut, and then those who keep the team strong. I don't know what he was thinking. So the fact that he gave them a vote.
Yeah, so they voted no confidence, and then the board was like, okay, we're going to be done with him. It's just so he should have been listening to Cap and Gown, because we've been talking about how people are just being taxed more and more and more things. I just don't understand why there wasn't good conversation with him about that. Doesn't make any sense. Please don't do that.
I mean, seriously, $85,000 is, that's legitimately almost 2 student success coaches.
Yeah, for sure.
Some cases.
Please don't do that. Presidents, if you're listening, please don't do that. Please make wise choices for your people. Okay, this one is shocking to me. So you remember in 2010, the University of Phoenix, pioneer in online learning, they had 470,000 students enrolled in 1,700 programs. Okay, so that's 2010.
And how many campuses did they have? I mean, it was...
Yeah, so they had close to 300 campuses.
Yeah.
By 2025, there will be 1 University of Phoenix campus left.
Wow.
And it will be in Phoenix. So that's good. Right now, there's only 17. So Nevada, Texas, California, they all have one or two, but it's like, it's just so crazy to think about all of those students. Now their enrollment is at 83,000, which is still gigantic, but compared to almost 500,000, it's much smaller.
Oh, yeah.
And in 2012, they closed 115 physical locations. They had 112, and then they've just been closing and closing and closing. So by 2025, there will only be one campus left. Isn't that shocking?
It is. It's really shocking. I think it speaks toward the number of online programs across all of our schools.
Yeah.
It's also the innovator's dilemma. So as they were really innovative, like Arizona State learned a lot from University of Phoenix, and a lot of great programs have leveled up. So
you just take like that 470,000 students and then you just divide them up, right? Like Arizona State has some, our schools are doing awesome online programs, right?
Just in Arizona, like Grand Canyon State, there's a lot for Grand Canyon.
Yeah, pretty interesting. Okay, this one, okay, these last three are my favorites. So first of all, here's something that you didn't know existed. There's a new NCAA rule that says colleges can pay student athletes up to $6,000 a year for getting good grades. So let's just think about that for a minute. Talk about an about face where it's like, you can't take college athletes to dinner. Now you can pay them $6,000 if they're doing a good job. This article in The Guardian, so they called all of these schools and talked to, we're talking like Big 12 schools, like powerhouse, Division I, huge athletic schools. They talked to all sorts of athletes across the board. None of the athletes had heard about this. None of their schools had told them that this existed now. Of 130 schools at the highest level of college football, only 22 of them plan on paying their students under this new rule.
Does the NCAA say what the like GPA, what constitutes a good grade?
Yeah, I'm sure they do. I don't have it in front of me, but I'm sure it's like eligibility. I mean, I think that that's actually what they're going for, is like you have to maintain your eligibility. Okay. So a couple of things, I would encourage you to read this article. Like I said, it's in The Guardian. Here's what I think is interesting. First of all, coaches have historically for a long time gotten paid bonuses for athletes' athletic performance. So at schools like Michigan and Berkeley, for example, not only are coaches getting paid on the number of games they win, but also they're getting paid for their students' athletic performance, which seems to me like then you should extend that to athletes being able to get some money as well, if you're going to pay the coach for it, right? But you're not going to pay the student. So that's really interesting. Some of the quotes that came out of this, basketball player who goes to school at one of the Power 5 campuses said, "We all know the concept of student athlete is a joke created by the NCAA to limit athletes in the past from benefiting monetarily so that revenues they drive in the world will be given to schools and coaches." So Matt, you were saying, as we were talking about this earlier, like the distinction between the Big 12 or these like powerhouse basketball schools where they're making millions of dollars.
Yeah.
And so many of the schools that we serve where they're not making millions of dollars from those teams, right?
Not from the sport.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's a huge discrepancy to think about the school profiting so much and then not giving back to athletes. And then what we deal with oftentimes where the school's like, we're not profiting from these athletic programs. Pretty interesting.
So there is an interesting thing. And I think for our listeners, they would agree, like they're a student, we don't in general pay students to get good grades.
Yeah.
You know, so yeah. It is like, well, you're getting a scholarship to be an athlete and there's a value in that. I don't know. I'd like to hear what Shauna has to say about this.
Yeah. Well, our Big 12, they talked to a Big 12 football player and he said, "I don't think it's fair to offer this to athletes and not other students on campus." This is what I think is interesting about it. It also adds to the stigma that college athletes don't want to be in college other than to play their sport, which is not true for everyone, which I really appreciate that perspective. Like we're paying you to be here because you mostly want to do basketball. And then like, oh yeah, also you're getting these grades, which we have to incentivize other than the fact that you should get good grades so that you can get a college degree, right?
I think so. We've talked a lot about the churn in higher education right now. And a lot of, I mean, if you just go back over 46 episodes of Cap and Gown in all of your State of the Unions, how just in a year, it's so much has happened.
I know.
There are new NCAA rules and there's going to be some trying to figure it out. Right.
Yeah.
And I think having this balanced understanding of, I love that. So here's a perspective. Here's another perspective. Are we going to find what's right now? No, we're going to all experiment. We're going to make mistakes. But it is good to say these student athletes are investing so much time.
Yeah.
And I was talking to a student athlete, interviewing him for an internship, and the number of hours he spends a week, there's no capacity during football season for him to work.
For sure.
So at that, I think, I don't know about compensating for grades, but compensating for sport maybe
would be interesting. Yeah.
Makes sense.
Well, it's like we were talking about the Cobra effect, right? Because you just make this change and then all of a sudden the ripple effect of that and conversations and how people are thinking about it and all of that kind of stuff is so interesting. Did you see this football team that's putting QR codes on the back of their jerseys instead of numbers now?
Where do they go? To the player profile? Their name is?
Yeah.
Oh, that's fun.
Yeah, I mean, but listen, I think it's an upshot of this, right? Because it's like all of a sudden you are in charge of your likeness and your image. And so
I still need their number.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. If I were a ref, I'd be like, we're not doing this.
What do you say?
Put a number on there if you don't mind.
Hold on. I got to scan his back. Hold on. Penalty on. Yeah.
All right. Great article inside Higher Ed about ending unpaid internships. So what I like about this article is that it gives really extensive data on how helpful internships are.
Oh, yeah.
First of all, they say 70% of white students said they'd had an unpaid internship and 73% had a paid internship. Okay. But then they're saying the data show that students of color are less likely to have any internships, paid or unpaid. So if we look then at Black students and Hispanic students, it's down to like 8% and 6%.
What?
So, and then among first generation college students, it's 25% said that they had unpaid internships and 20% paid. So
what year was that?
That's 2021.
Wow.
Yeah. So then they go on to say the reason this is an issue for equality work is that paid internships pay off. So basically, students who worked as a paid intern received an average of 1.12 job offers in 2021, while unpaid interns got an average of 0.85, and those with no internship experience received 0.64 job offers, right? So it's really, really important that we have opportunities for our students to be able to have these internships. And this article goes on to talk about innovative college programs. The University of Wisconsin at Madison has a Success Works program, which funds undergraduates $5,000 for internships. They either can take that as wages or it can assist them with expenses, which we don't think about, like room and board, the transportation costs to be able to get to your internship. So I love that program. That's only been around for two years, but it's been really helpful to those students. Also, New College of Florida has an internship program. It's only been around for 2 years. It's a 4-credit program, so I really like that. They sponsor internships in education, youth development, fine arts, theater, community outreach, video production. They got a grant from the Mellon Foundation that pays minimum wage salary stipends and also pays the internship provider about $1,600 as well. So you think about, Matt, like the work you and Braden did in the Career Center, if you had funds to be able to say to students, hey, we can pay you so that you can go have this internship, but then also to go to businesses and say, hey, we'll pay you if you'll provide this internship, I just think is such an awesome idea.
So this is, I'm passionate about internships, and I mean, our internship, students who have worked with us through our internships are awesome. When I think about, unpaid internships, I had a real problem with, because it was like the employer didn't value and didn't give that intern real work. I mean, so many times it was like, man, these are highly capable students. They need a great experience. So, how do we get out of the mode of unpaid internships? So then giving an incentive to businesses is important, or other organizations to give those. I would say internships and career readiness programs are going to be a huge need and distinctive for our schools. So I love that Wisconsin-Madison's doing this. Man, so many of our schools need to do this, because it's how businesses, organizations will find the talent at your school. It's such a great way for them to have a long interview then to hire. And so a lot of schools kind of take a passive mode with internships, instead of being really like, from the time that you come on as a freshman, we're going to get you ready for these, and then we're going to have a huge list of opportunities. And then, as you're saying,
I just was going to say, I think not only investing so that students can get paid, but also when you ease the transition for employers, where you say, like, our students are intern ready, we've taught them how to do that, like what it means, like all of that. Because, the startup for hiring an intern is costly, not monetarily, but just like, hey, we have to teach you all of these different things and different processes. And so alleviating that for an employer, I think, is a great place for a career center to say, we want to certify that our students are intern ready and want to come work for you. So
there's a whole lot to say about that. It is great.
Okay. My last one is about one of our schools that's in the news. And you guys, this school, I'm going to tell you my two favorite things about this school. So it's Stevens Institute of Technology. So proud to be able to serve them and their students. My first favorite thing about this school is that it's in Hoboken, New Jersey, which just makes my mouth happy to say Hoboken. But the second thing that I love about them is that 10 years ago, they're like, here's what we would like to do. We would like to have more students. We would like to have better academically prepared students. And we would like to increase diversity of our institution. That's all. More students, better prepared students, and more diverse students. And over the last 10 years, they have nailed it at every place. That's all they did. So 10 years ago, they were 4,000 students. No, sorry, that's not true. 10 years ago, they wanted to grow to 4,000 students. So they've done that. Their applications went from 4,000 a decade ago to 12,000 this year. Second, they almost doubled in size. So 2,400 undergraduates to 4,000 undergraduates. A 67% increase in size. Enrollment of female undergraduates went up by 98%. Now it's a small population or percentage of their population, but still 98%. And there's been 149% rise in underrepresented minority students since 2011. Awesome. Not only that, but their average SAT score in 2021 increased 145 points since 2011. So these students are coming in with a 1432 average. And even with COVID, 97% of their graduates either had jobs or were in graduate school 6 months after graduation in 2021. So they were just like, here's what we're going to do. And then they put a plan in place. Now they invest in technology. And so they're really saying the reason that we've been so successful is, first of all, we've created pre-college programs free for underrepresented minority students. So if you want to come to those programs, you can, and you can learn a whole bunch of stuff. And that's been a great pipeline for them. Also, they're recruiting from a lot of different countries. So that's pretty interesting. But they are like, hey, the reason we're being so successful is because we are delivering on our value proposition. You come, spend the money. Yeah. And you are going to get a great job and you're going to get hired, and we're investing. So to your point about career, I mean, that is what parents and students want to hear is, if I'm going to pay this money, I need to understand how I'm going to be able to be successful moving forward. And I need a pipeline to be able to do that.
I love Stevens, I mean, we know this just working with them. Their people are awesome.
Yeah.
But when you look at it through the lens of a senior in college, like my son did, he was accepted to Stevens. And I mean, the way that they pursue, the way that they connect you to community, they're just so intentional. It's just a really neat school.
Yeah, I love that.
All
right. That is the State of the Union. So let's move on to our culture code. Just want to set the stage for us. You guys remember that we have been talking about belonging cues. My conversation with Dr. Woosley was so good. I have gone back and listened to it a couple of times just to be like, all of these elements that she's bringing together about how we send belonging cues and these subtle things that we're doing is really, it was such a fantastic conversation. You and I have been talking about how we move from danger brain, how we move, but also how we move our students from danger brain, like risk, what's happening, to connection brain. And some really, really great examples of that. So once we start thinking about how we're teaching our community to send belonging cues to other students, the next thing that this book says is it's really important that you share vulnerabilities. And so I just think this is so vital to the work that we do in student success. I want to go through kind of some of the evidences in the book because I think it's really compelling. I think when you hear it, you're like, oh my gosh, we have to start doing that. And then I want to talk about how we apply that in our student success work. So I don't know if you saw this years ago, there were these questions that were going around that came specifically out of an experiment where they asked two strangers to ask each other these questions, and they had set A questions and set B questions. Okay. Set A was like, what's the best gift you ever received and why? Or who was your favorite actor or actress? Those questions are focused on information sharing. Then they had this other set of questions, which are things like, if a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, or anything else, what would you want to know? Or is there something you've dreamed of doing for a long time? Why haven't you done it? Okay. So those questions are focused on vulnerability. And what's so interesting is basically when you ask a stranger questions from set B, their heart rate goes faster. They show signs of anxiety. They're uncomfortable. They blush.
I started to feel that right then. So
yeah, they hesitate. They're like, because this is not a thing that we do with strangers. Like, I don't want to tell you about my hopes and dreams because it causes anxiety. It makes me very stressed out. However, if you got those questions, the set B questions, you reported feeling about 24% closer to the person who asked you than those information questions. And this study is really interesting because they did it with, so in the actual study, they had to stare into each other's eyes for 4 minutes, which that is a very long time to stare into somebody's eyes that you've never met before. They did this experiment with 71 pairs of strangers, and one of them ended up getting married.
Wow.
That's interesting. Yeah. Pick some random people and put them together. So what happens when you share vulnerabilities? There's this like confessional part where you're like telling this very hidden part of you to somebody. It's way more likely to make you feel discomfort and anxiety, but it also is a place where we are our most authentic self, right? Where we're showing our most like unvarnished, yeah, this is something that I'm really excited about or dreaming about or thinking about. And so I would like for us to kind of go down this path of why modeling sharing vulnerability is so important for our teams, because you remember, I'm always thinking about this like whole self, like me as a practitioner, whole person self, why it's important to have a team where I can share vulnerability. But then also, how do I use this information to help my students feel this culture of community and connection, right? So one interesting thing about sharing vulnerability is that it takes out all of the energy that you are using to try to cover your vulnerability. So instead of, I mean, Matt, we've been in meetings before where the person we're meeting with is untrustworthy, right? And so our job is not to be transparent and vulnerable. We are spending so much time choosing our words carefully, making sure that we're responding in the right way. Like it's kind of like just be as still as you can so that they don't freak out. You know what I mean?
I think we all have those people we've interacted with where it's just not, they've made it clear they're not taking their armor off and they're kind of ready for battle.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I've been thinking about, like I said, I've been thinking about this all day. Even in those cases, what's the right response to someone like that? You know?
I think there's definitely ways that we can mitigate that. But I just want to spend a minute thinking about how much work your brain is doing to be careful. Because one of the advantages of expressing vulnerability is that you don't have to do any of that work, right? You don't have to be like, I hope they can't tell. I hope I'm coming across. I hope they know, right? Like none
this
of
is
that.
like me for every cap and gown, right? Like it.
No, it's not like that. So I find that the most cooperative, delightful teams to be around are the ones where we just all agree covering up my vulnerabilities is a total waste of everybody's time because I trust you. So I'm not going to spend my effort there. I'm going to actually spend my effort on helpful things. Right.
Yeah.
However, I will say you have to be really careful because you could have an unsafe team. You could have a team where you should not share vulnerabilities because it's not, and that's true because your brain will never move from at-risk brain to connection brain because these are not people to be trusted. So I think you have to be very careful about that in terms of the kinds of teams that you're surrounded by. Okay, so I want to talk about what sharing a vulnerability looks like. And this is really important because it takes two people. To your point, there are places where sharing a vulnerability can definitely break down. So the first thing that we do is in relationships, we call this a bid. I'm making a bid, right? I'm saying I'm going to share something really vulnerable about me. And then the other person has to detect this signal, which that doesn't always happen. Sometimes we're like so flooded with emotion or what's going on in our brain, what's happening that somebody makes a bid of vulnerability and we totally miss it, right? So in that case, that vulnerability loop is broken because it wasn't addressed. I was like trying to say, hey, I'm scared or overwhelmed or worried. And the other person's like, I'm not acknowledging that.
Hey, I think this is super important right now. So for 2 years, we've all been in, like we've talked about, in this kind of threat brain and having to move to connect brain. This bid to connect, so if we just took the time to listen for those bids, we could be so much better as a team, the way that we support individuals on our team. So that's one of those things that I've been really thinking about is, I mean, I know that there are times just in the last 2 weeks where I totally missed that bid to connect. And what it then ends up happening is that person who sent out that bid, then it's like, oh no, this isn't the time. I can't.
That's right. Yeah. So in a successful loop, I show my vulnerability, you catch it, and then you respond to that signal by kind of joining me there by being like, yeah, this is really overwhelming, or yes, this is really scary, or this is a safe place for you to talk about your vulnerability, which then here's another problem. So you could be like, no, it's not safe. I actually don't like you and I don't want to hear about your problems. Right? So that would be a breakdown in the loop. But the other thing that can happen is so I expressed vulnerability, you caught it, you expressed it back to me. And I'm so stuck in whatever's happening in my brain that I missed that bid. And so then I'm like, why do you hate me? Why are we having this conflict? Why is this so stupid? Right. And you're like, wait, I saw your bid, I raised your bid, and then you didn't notice that. Right. So that's another place where we can really get crossways. Do you have something you want to say about that?
I just think that's so, I mean, people are just so complicated, you know?
I know, isn't it great? So I want to camp out here for a second because I was thinking about in our student success funnel, you guys thought you were going to get away with the whole cap and gown podcast without me talking about the student success funnel. False. In our student success funnel, what happens to our brain when we are in solve mode is that we totally can miss this bid for vulnerability coming from our student. So we cannot hear it. We can not give them an opportunity because we're doing business right now. Also, even if we hear it, we can be like, I don't have time to respond to that right now. So we're just going to, because we got to solve, like we got to get you registered. And so thinking about how do we make this transition in the business that we're doing with the student in this solve brain to connect, I think is so important. And I'm a big believer in when we name a thing, we notice it. So when we can name, you need to be looking for your students' bid of vulnerability. You're going to be noticing that more often. And then you can match that and make it a much safer place for you.
I think in every interaction a student has, and we'll talk more through different roles on a campus, but especially a student who's struggling, they're putting out, it might just be subtle, but if you're paying attention to it, you could really change that student's life.
Yeah. So we do have a couple of examples of these, and it's really funny, Matt, because as I was trying to think of examples, I was thinking each of these examples that we're going to give you is really like a moment in time, but it is so memorable when you can move out of solve into responding to this vulnerability piece, that it's like, I have examples of that from 20 years ago, right? Where in this moment, I either made a bid for vulnerability or responded to a bid for vulnerability. And the thing that happened in the next 30 seconds, you don't ever forget about it, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So I think one just really concrete example, I've told you guys before that when we were moving, I was like, I told my daughter, like, hey, I'm going to be in solve mode. I was moving houses. Yeah. So I'm trying to direct everything. And I'm like, I'm in solve mode. So I don't have time. I'm in manager mode. I got stuff to do. But also Lillian's little. So like sometimes she wants to be connected to me, right? Which I don't have time for. I'm like, I'm sorry. I'm telling everybody what they should be doing. So I said to her, hey, when you need to connect with me, I need you to come over and just put your hand on me. So throughout the entire day, she would just come over, and what happens to my brain is like, oh, there's a little person who needs you to look at her and say, how are you? I love you. I'm happier. Is everything going okay? Okay. And then I can move back into solve, right? It's just such a tangible example of a safe space for her to feel like, hey, I'm feeling lonely, anxious, worried, whatever the thing is, I'm going to make this bid. And then the confidence that it's going to get me out of my manager brain into connection. I think it's really interesting. Awesome. You have a great example of this, but I want to tell you an example one time where I was with a student and she was going through a lot of stuff, and she made a bid for vulnerability and I matched her there, and she started to get very teary. And she said to me basically, hey, I have a lot that I want to talk about, but I cannot move into connection mode with you right now. We have to stay in solve because I have to go to work. I have eye makeup on. Like there's a lot of stuff that I have to check off the list, but I will come back tomorrow and I will be in the connect space with you.
I mean, she used like real words. She wasn't using our successful.
No. Yeah. She's like, hey, I don't have time to do that with you right now because I got to go to work and I have eye makeup on. So I will come back tomorrow and we can talk about it. But I really appreciated it because it was such a good example of like, do you know that movement into connection is weighty? And sometimes we're like, I don't have time, like in real life, I don't have time for that right now. But as student success people, when you make space for a student to say, like, I really would like to move into how I'm actually feeling, how I'm actually overwhelmed, how I really don't know what to do, you help bring that awareness to them. Right. So I love that. You have a great example of this too.
And like you said, it becomes a marker in everybody's mind. So for that student you're talking about, I mean, from then on, she knew she could trust you, and she's coming back. Mm-hmm. And there will be that time where she has the time to spend with you and tell you what's really going on. Yeah. So my story, when I was teaching marketing, I'm in the classroom, and it was a very sad day. We had a student who committed suicide, and it was awful. And I walk into the class, everyone comes in, and I can just see it in their eyes, just sadness. And so I just stopped and I said, hey, today's awful. And there's not a thing that I could say about marketing that matters after a thing like this. I care about you. If you're hurting, if you're feeling despair, please talk to me after class. We just spent time. And and I made it really clear, like, the world matters. Marketing doesn't matter. Your life matters. I care about you. And after class, it's my John story, because two Johns, one waited in the hall and the other came up to me to talk to me about what was going on in his life in really detailed ways. And so as we talked about that, and I told him, how I could help, he left. The other John came in, and basically the same thing. Well, what's amazing about that is years later, I get a message from both of them. One calls and he says, hey, can I use you as a reference to work on submarines? The Navy's asking for references. Could I use you? Awesome. The other sent me a note and just said, I want you to know that you're in my journal as one who made a significant impact in my life.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, what did I do right there? I just said I care. Like, hey, I see there's a thing going on with you all, and I care. And let's just talk about how awful this day is. And I know on campuses, this happens throughout the year. We have tragedy in a lot of different ways. And if our team took the time to just say, hey, let's be real, none of this matters compared to us just grieving together tragedy.
So I think it's really important part of that story, Matt, is that you said, I'm holding space to tell you I feel sad, right? I feel sad today, and I'm looking at your faces and I see you feel sad too. And so that's the vulnerability loop. You make a bid, I feel sad, they hear you, they respond in the same way, and you feel closer because you're sharing in those vulnerabilities. I think it's a great example. There's a lot of sort of experiments in this book that I'm not going to go into in great detail, but basically the upshot of these experiments is that when you are called to share vulnerability in front of a group of people, even if they are not receptive. So for example, you have to make a presentation in front of a group of people and they're not smiling at you, like 5-minute presentation, you've got to do this thing and everyone's just staring at you. The outcome of that is that you actually are more cooperative with those people. It boosts your willingness to be connected and cooperate with them. And that when you are put in a position where you have power over people, it decreases your ability to be cooperative with them or your interest in being cooperative. And the other important piece about that is that it is contagious. So that even if I made a presentation in front of these people, when I'm with different people, I'm still more likely to be cooperative with them because it's contagious, because we are in this place where we see, oh, everybody's being vulnerable and cooperative and what, right? So it's really interesting because it is this idea of boosting cooperation comes from sharing vulnerability, and increasing power decreases it. And so I want you to think about like being in a team Or Matt, my example of like the emails that some people send to students where it has all their credentials at the end. It's like 50,000 letters after their name, right?
Right.
That is putting yourself in a position of power. And so it decreases the possibility that you are going to share these vulnerabilities. You're coming into this encounter like, hey, just so you know, I'm more important than you. I'm the boss. I can tell you what to do. All of those pieces, instead of what this book suggests, which is we should come into those experiences being like, hey, I feel really, one of the baseball coaches, like professional baseball coaches, said he would start out his speech at the beginning of the season. He would stand up in front of all those players and he would say, I feel really nervous talking in front of all of you. And they would all be like, yeah, like we're really nervous that you're talking to us, right? So sharing that vulnerability bid is really how you make your students feel really, really comfortable.
It's so important for us to think about when we're engaging a student or our team.
Yeah.
To be in that place where we don't have to have positional power. We can be meek. We can let down our guard and show them that we're real people. Yeah. And then what comes out of that is just going to be very powerful.
Well, this happened, speaking of feeling vulnerable, this happened last week in our team meeting in Denver. Those of you who know me know that future planning is my least favorite thing ever. It like gives me hives and makes me stressed out. And like you can say like, hey, Rachel, we need you to go talk to 5,000 people about this thing. And I'd be like, let's do it. If you're like, hey, in 6 months, we need you to do this thing. I'm just like, why did you tell me? It's so stressful. Okay, whatever. So we were doing a team meeting and it was all about future planning because thank goodness we have people on our team who are awesome at future planning, right? For sure. So I know going into this meeting that we're going to be doing this thing that I really hate, but it's super, super important. But at the end of it, I was like, okay, everybody say what you're worried about. And as I'm sharing with my team, I'm worried that I have to live in this place of future planning forever. I start crying, which I'm mortified about because it's genuine vulnerability. Like I really feel overwhelmed and awful. And it's a safe team, right? So my friends are like, hey, we're doing this so you don't have to live here. We're on your team. Thank you so much for working with us. We are going to set you up to be successful so you don't have to do. It was really nice. But also I was kind of horrified because I was like, what is wrong with me? Like, this is terrible. And Matt, you said to me afterwards, you were like, thank you so much for sharing that vulnerability there. Which is important because I didn't walk away. Like I walked away feeling loved by my team members, but I also was embarrassed. And you were like, hey, no, that's how we have a healthy team, right?
That was really important.
Yeah. We say, I want to make it so that you don't feel overwhelmed or whatever the thing is. So it's just such a good example of like having space to be able to do that. And nobody was embarrassed but me. Right? It's not like people are like, I can't bear to look at you because you're crying about this thing. Right? Instead, they're like, oh my gosh, Rachel, we're so sorry. Okay, we're going to work with you. I say that to say, sometimes we have tactical displays of vulnerability and sometimes we have genuine displays of vulnerability. And I think it's a really important distinction. So with my safe team, that is a genuine display of vulnerability. It's why I was kind of embarrassed about it because I was like, oh my gosh, now this is coming up and I don't know what to do about it because it was genuine and they were trustworthy. But I think when we're dealing with our students, there's a tactical display of vulnerability that is really, really important for us to learn how to have with them. If you think about starting this vulnerability loop, let's just talk about with academic probation, so academic recovery. If you said, as I would always say when I was doing academic recovery, so this student's vulnerable because I know what their GPA was last semester, right? They come in and they're embarrassed and they feel vulnerable and they don't know. And I say, you have no idea what kind of student I was. You have no idea what my GPA was my sophomore year. So don't worry about me. You and I'm having a conversation with you like I would have had with somebody back when I was a student, right? That this is a safe place for us to have this conversation, I think will settle them. I was telling you, I think it would be so interesting based on why you're meeting with the student to give them a vulnerability bid at the very beginning of your meeting. So let's say you got a referral on a student and you come out to get them 2 minutes late, and you have them sit down and you say, I'm so sorry that I was late. I don't know if you've ever had this experience where there's so many things going on, you're trying to juggle all of them and you just don't feel like you're being successful at any of them. That's kind of how my day is going right now, right? And so what you have just done there is be like, hey, I have a deep understanding of how things can go crazy town, and you might feel like totally overwhelmed, right? But
because they're coming in with feeling shame and afraid, and for you to be able to come in and just share with them, they're, especially if you think about a student who you received an early alert on, what all of that weight that they're bringing in, and when you're like, hey, you're a real person.
Sometimes this happens. I do that often with the email issue, right? Like somebody hasn't responded to my email and I'm like, hey, if you're like me, you have 7 emails in your inbox that you need to respond to. That's okay. Like that's how it goes sometimes. And then that allows them to be like, oh, she's not mad at me. She's not shaming me. She's saying this is part of our human existence, right? So figuring out how you use those tactical things. I was thinking, Matt, about how if this is true, that this vulnerability space is contagious. First of all, how you put people in a res hall. So you and Viva do this analysis on res hall retention. If you have a res hall, I was thinking about what you shared before about like your floor in your res hall your first year. The communication there is that vulnerability is not acceptable. Like, you better be tough. You better be like, everything's fine, right? All of that kind of stuff. That's contagious. That is going to make a bad team. So how do we make sure that we have a good mix of people with high institutional commitment and high community and sense of belonging that are going to help other people kind of adjust to this idea that we're willing to be vulnerable with each other?
So just thinking about the role of an RA in that, to be able to start it off early on in the semester, hey, and then it's like we've talked about the rhythm of the academic year. Your RA could be an expert in these places to say, because they're a student too. Hey, I'm feeling really overwhelmed. I've got all of my exams coming up. I've got all of these projects. So I just think I love what you're saying about this bid. How can we be intentional, not inauthentic,
right?
Because these are real issues, but to just voice them, for your RAs to, hey, when you take the time to start it off and be vulnerable with your floor, it's going to lead to a better culture on your floor, as opposed to what I had.
So what's interesting about this is that if you had a conversation in RA training, not that you are the leader, but that you are a genuine person who's modeling the places in an academic year where we feel overwhelmed. Man, Mondays, tell your residents, Mondays are so hard. I wake up at 8 and I go, and then I come back and I just feel totally overwhelmed. And how that's a great conversation starter for then a student to be like, listen, Wednesdays are my worst day. Oh, well, how do you manage that? Blah, 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 blah. Right. Or, oh my goodness, the 3rd week in the semester is so hard because you start having all of your tests. And I'm always really nervous that I'm going to get a bad grade, even though I've studied, because I've never had this test from this faculty member before. Yeah, I'm worried about that too. Those little bids where you're saying we have a common experience are such a great way to open up conversation about what's really happening. And both of you actually will leave that conversation feeling better connected and more like you have a sense of belonging with each other, instead of feeling like nobody understands me, right? This was a terrible mistake.
It's a great practice. So action item, it's just such a great practice to work through, regardless of where you work on a campus. If you engage students, if you're in the registrar's office, or if you're an advisor, or you're in financial aid, or you work with probation students, or you're an RA, or you lead a group of first generation students, to just think through, there's that first time you interact with them where you can build trust, but then throughout the semester, throughout the year, leading them on. It's just, there's so many ways that you could communicate to them, like, hey, you're a real person, I'm a real person, you can trust me, let's do this together.
Yeah, sometimes we feel overwhelmed. And I was thinking about this with deciding students. So one of the really nice things about deciding students and having a program for them where they're all in the same room is that as I create space for us to be vulnerable, because I'm going to model that, what they hear is everybody is going through the same thing I am, right? So then they're able to connect with each other. They're not just connecting with me. It's not just me saying like, this can be really overwhelming. I understand. Here's what you might be facing. They're hearing from each other. And what it does, we've talked about before, is like normalizing it. Like, hey, that's normal. You guys are in a really hard position, and it's totally normal for you to be having the feelings. I always make the joke, but it is a sharing of vulnerability where I say, the only thing we have to do, deciding students, is just figure out the meaning of your life. That's all. That's all we have to do, right? And they're like, "Oh my gosh, right? It's really
Rachel,
hard."
I was just thinking back to, because you used to talk to not only deciding students, but also had their parents there.
Yeah.
And what that did to settle mom and dad, and so what happened in that room where, because there's also this vulnerability of a parent, like, they don't know. Why don't they know? Why can't they decide? And for you to say like, hey, look around. We're going to learn, and we're going to be confident. Yeah. It's so I think voicing those things is just, again, it's so good. It's so powerful. And the way that connects that student to positive thinking about this community, it's just, it's going to be, great.
Powerful. Yeah. So I think you touched on like community events, being able to say, I feel sad about this, or I feel overwhelmed, or this is really hard. I would just be looking in all of those populations for the places where you can make those bids for vulnerability and where you can be really intentional about listening. I was thinking about our process mapping where we say like, my guess would be a student would feel really anxious when they have to go pay their bill. My guess would be a student would be really anxious when they have to declare their major. But those are points where you want to be listening for an expression of vulnerability, and so that you can meet it. And then also where you can start off with, hey, this is a safe space where I'm going to tell you the truth about me. And then that's going to help them be able to share that too. The upshot of all of this is that, this is a quote from the book, exchanges of vulnerability, which we naturally tend to avoid, are the pathway through which trusting cooperation is built. And so again, I think having named the idea that it makes us anxious and uncomfortable, and it's not how most of us make our way in the world, right? And yet those are the very places that make a marker in our brain where we say, even though I'm not perfect, even though I told you the truth about me, even though I did something terrible or something I feel ashamed about or something awful, you are willing to be close to me and make an allowance for me and be like, hey, it's okay. Like, we're on the same team and I'm voting for you. I'm with you, right? Unconditional positive regard, no matter what's going on. And that's the place where we create this feeling of, I wouldn't leave these people ever, right? I want to stay in a community where these people are that intentional about seeing me and saying you're okay anyway.
Committed to me,
for sure. So you guys, our action items are really, really simple. I know so many of you do this. I was thinking about Brian, who's joined us, and just all of the ways that he is really present with students, right? And there's like, stuff we have to solve, but just like this building of community where I see you and I'm intentional about sharing the truth and all of those things. You guys do this naturally. I think it's why you're great at student success. But my challenge is to put a marker in my brain that I'm going to be intentional about looking for those cues and providing those bids. So I think you practice this. If you have a safe team, I think you just practice it. And remember, it's going to be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean it's the wrong thing to do. It just means it makes us anxious because we're not used to doing it. I think you are really intentional about listening to vulnerability language with students, especially in really hard processes where they might feel ashamed or overwhelmed. And you make sure that you don't ignore bids that students are giving to you. And then also, I really like the idea of predicting vulnerability. This is a place where, because we're experts, we can do this. And I can tell you, there are markers in my life where I was so busy trying to solve a thing and somebody said, hey, Rachel, you're pretending like it's about this, but really you're feeling very vulnerable and like careful. And when somebody predicted that for me and I realized like, oh my gosh, that's true, it changed everything. Like I felt so close to that person and so understood. And it put me in a place where then I'm able to talk about what's actually going on with me because they've moved me into that place. So I just think looking for opportunities to predict the vulnerabilities that a student might be feeling is a really powerful way to kind of even the playing field and say, we all sometimes don't like what's going on inside of us, but we don't have to be ashamed of it. We can actually be, share this and I will still like you even after you share it.
Well, I love this. I'm going to work on it all week because I think it's so important.
Yeah.
Well, thank you, Rachel.
Yeah, great conversation. So you guys will have more of an updated schedule. We're going to go all the way through May. And then, like I said, we're going to take June and July off, and then we'll come back in August. But always grateful for you to join us and have a great rest of your week.